Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I offer my pranam to my Gurudev and to Sri Krishna, speaker of Bhagavad Gita. So may we all find inspiration and enlightenment in these texts. Yes. So that's a very excellent question, and I'm going to address that. So let's start with this question. Very good question. So first of all, I think that there's a little bit of confusion about repressible urges and urges that should not be suppressed. So urges such as the need to urinate, the need to defecate, the need to pass air, these are all considered to be things that should not be repressed. The sexual urges are an example, and the urge to become angry, the urge to speak, these are all types of urges that actually one should exercise control over. I know many of us love dogs, but a dog is an example of a creature that does not have a developed consciousness, although, you know, anyone who's been around animals knows that they do have consciousness. It's just it's animal, but they have feelings, they have consciousness, they have awareness. You know, you say bad dog and you see how a dog reacts and tell me that a dog doesn't have feelings, right? But they have no sense of control or no restraint. So, so really, when we talk about brahmacharya in the yoga system, it really is referring to specifically being able to restrain and being able to control our behavior. Even in a social context, there are so many problems that arise from that. In particular, so brahmacharya is referred to as urdhva-retas. Retas refers to shukra dhatu specifically. And urdhva means making it go up. So if we are able to, through yoga practice and through development of our consciousness, focus on raising shukra dhatu to the intellect, it allows us to develop refined intellect. And it's natural when we become older, our libido becomes less. So, you know, for men taking Viagra or Levitra or whatever is the latest phallic allegory for a pharmaceutical for that, that's actually not good because it's taking away from our immunity, it's taking away from our duration of life. You know, that decreased libido is nature's sign of, okay, slow down a little bit, you know, focus on your developing your consciousness. So I hope that answers the question. I think really there was just a misunderstanding about what are the repressible urges and what are the urges that should not be suppressed. And actually one of the verses that we're going to talk about today will actually address this issue as well. So good to know. So I'm going to try to start posting things on this new Bhagavad Gita course. I'm keeping it separate just so we can manage the enrollment more easily so that, you know, you'll all perpetually have access to it, and we may eventually go to a webcast format and make it more open So we're just keeping that enrollment in the Bhagavad Gita course separate from the yoga teacher training. So chapter 2, verse 50. So hopefully that answers the question about sexual urges and energy moving up the chakras. Also in Kundalini yoga practice, back in the 60s, Kundalini became sort of a buzzword, and people thought, oh wow, Kundalini, cool. It's like sex and yoga, cool. And that was really not. Kundalini is actually a very rigid discipline. It involves some tantric practices as well, but the goal of Kundalini is also to awaken the Kundalini, and especially focusing on the Sushumna Ida Pingala nadis to move the energy and raise the consciousness. In Kundalini, even when there are tantric sexual practices involved, the goal is to not, usually sexuality is centered on the Swadhisthana chakra. The Swadhisthana chakra is the chakra above the Muladhara chakra, and it is associated with the water element. So, but in Kundalini practice, one is focusing on moving up the chakras, going up, not going down in the Swadhisthana, and not focusing on the enjoyment aspect, but actually the practices are done without an enjoying spirit. So it's and a Kundalini, and this is also a very good point. Yes, Kundalini is something not to be practiced casually. It is a tantric practice. It is very powerful, and it should only be done with rigid discipline under the guidance of a very serious and sober master, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Improper practice of Kundalini can awaken the energies, and it can cause vata disorders. It can cause madness. So it's something to you be very careful of. I think nowadays people who practice Kundalini are mostly, they're following a parampara, they're following a tradition, and it's more responsibly taught than it was back in the 60s and 70s when I first became aware of it. So let's start with verse 58. Yada samharate chayam kurmungani vasarvashaha indriyanindriyartebhyas tasya pragya pratishtita. When a person can completely withdraw his or her senses from their respective sense objects at will, just as a tortoise withdraws its limbs into its shell, then he is said to be of fixed intelligence. So remember, we started in this last, in our last class, we had a series of questions where Arjuna is asking Krishna, what are the symptoms? How does a person sit? That person who's in transcendent. And here Krishna is answering that. That person is able to withdraw their senses from the sense object. So I actually think I touched on this last week, but we talk in Sankhya about how the senses, we talk about the tanmatras, these forms of sense perception, and we reach out with our senses. We have subtle forms of our senses that engage with the sense objects. And in the yoga process, think about the tortoise, sucking the limbs in, closing up the plastron, and it's just, like a closed box. And very frustrating for dogs, but that's what the tortoise does, and that's the example that Krishna is giving here of withdrawing the senses. This is also something that we talk about when we talk about Ashtanga Yoga and the process of the Yama Niyama Asana Pratyahara. Pratyahara, withdrawal from engagement with the sense objects. Now, this is a really, really great verse, and it's also very relevant to what we're talking about in urges, Vishayava nivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. He who identifies himself with the body may restrict his enjoyment by withdrawing the senses from their objects, but the taste for sense pleasure remains. One whose intelligence is fixed, however, has realized Paramatma. Therefore, his taste for sense objects automatically ceases. Now, there are several different meanings in this verse. A very important, simple, basic meaning is that if we are trying to focus, let's say that, I've said, okay, I'm going to fast, or I'm going to do some tapasya. Let's say on Ekadashi day, I'm doing something. I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna not eat grains and beans, which is a type of fasting, and I'm going to engage in some kirtan. I'm going to do some spiritual practices for my own benefit of my Atma. But when we do these things, our consciousness should be in it. We should not be, leave ourselves connected to the sense objects. We need to get our consciousness off of it. If we give up things and all we're doing is thinking about the things that we give up, we're not really benefiting. What we need to do is we need this param darshan, param drishtva nivartate. So when we experience the higher taste of connection, of connecting with the divine, and param is here referred to as the Paramatma, the super soul. So this is a principle in yoga. The super soul, or Paramatma, is a form of Bhagavan Vishnu who resides within the heart of every being as the witness, as the overseer, as our constant companion, the one who's been with us lifetime after lifetime, our actual best friend. And in yoga practice, one is able to connect and one is able to aspire for darshan, where the vision, the presence, experiencing the presence of the super soul, or Paramatma. When one is able to do that, even in a very small way, it becomes very easy to give up our tastes for other things. There is a saying in Vedanta, raso vaisaha, that rasa is indeed the essence of who we are. We want to taste things, so we talk about rasa dhatu, for example. We talk about tasting. We talk about how food becomes transformed according to taste, and it becomes digested. It starts with rasa. Rasa is extremely important. So when we do cooking, we're not just changing our taste. Our tastes change the way we digest things. So rasa is extremely important. But rasa also refers to the types of things that we are tasting in reference to what we're enjoying, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing. So we can say in a broader sense, ras is the juice in life. Ras is the juice in life. It's the thing that we want to taste. We want to taste loving relationships. We don't want to taste bitter, nasty, cruel, harsh, unpleasant things. We want to taste sweet things. We want to love and be loved. This is something that is inherent in the Atma. Anandamayobhyasat. That is also from Vedanta. So when we are able to connect with a ras, or a taste of something that is divine, that is transcendent, we're not bothered by hankerings for the things that are addictive or harmful or that, may pull us down from the, our higher purpose. So simply giving up things, giving up sense objects doesn't mean that we become detached from our taste, but what we need to do is we need to connect with the higher taste. Okay, and then we're skipping ahead to 2 verses that you may already be familiar with. So, we've talked about this in Manasa. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kamat krodho bijayate. By meditating on the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment to them. Attachment gives rise to lust, which in turn leads to the awakening of anger. Again, this ties in very well with the concept of urges which are suppressible and urges which should not be suppressed. If we think about something, and I like to give this example of ice cream, I think about ice cream and I suddenly develop attachment for it. Oh yeah, I would like to have that. That's the sangha, that's the attachment. And then I develop a desire. Oh, I want to have some. And then, when that desire is frustrated, you took my ice cream. How dare you? We become angry. So you see the progression there. And this is, now you're seeing this in context in the Gita. And Sri Krishna is telling us this so that we have a clue about how, if we want to control the mind, what we need to do. We need to move our object of focus from sense objects to things that are of a higher nature, things that are of a divine nature. Because as soon as we contemplate, as soon as our mind is associated with the things that are enjoyable, the things that are vishaya, things that are sense objects, then we develop attachment, we develop a desire, and when the desire is frustrated, it leads to anger. I mean, I know this almost sounds like we're talking about, couples counseling or something. It's like, okay, you were thinking about something that you wanted, you developed the desire for it, you didn't get what you wanted, and now you become angry and there's a fight. But it applies across the board. It applies in so many spheres, and there's a progression. There is this progressive degradation, you can say, of our consciousness into desire. And it specifically, kama specifically refers to the desire for material things, and it's that attachment that will tend to awaken anger when we don't get what we want. Then the next verse continues the process. Krodhat bhavati sammoha, sammohat smriti vibhrama, smriti brangshad buddhinasho, buddhinashat pranashyati. Anger gives rise to utter delusion, and from such delusion comes loss of memory, forgetting instructions of scriptures such as Bhagavad Gita. Loss of memory destroys one's intelligence, and when intelligence is destroyed, one's entire spiritual direction in life is lost. One then falls into the ocean of material existence. So this is being directed towards someone who is aspiring to be a transcendentalist, someone who wants to become free from the suffering of this world through yoga practice. So Krishna is saying, here's what is going to happen. Here's what happens if you can't control the mind. If you let the mind wander, if you let the mind become fixed on sense objects, there is a natural progression. So you need to keep it fixed on higher things. So this was what we heard in that verse, Vishayavanivartante 259. Param drishtva nivartate. Get yourself connected with some spiritual taste, with some divine taste, and then you can, give up the lower tastes. Otherwise, this is the progression that tends to develop. And, it's also said when I was in the ashram, I would hear this a lot because, being young and being brahmachari, it's kind of a difficult combination. You're in your teens and everything is at its peak. All the hormones are raging, and and when you give up something, when you say, okay, I'm not going to look at women as objects of enjoyment or not look at men as objects of enjoyment, I'm going to do my spiritual practices, then your senses start banging on the door and saying, hey, 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 look at this, look at that, look at that, look at her, oh my God, look at him. And that becomes very difficult. So if you think about that, if you think about someone in that sort of context, this is really what Krishna is addressing. If we are living, more of a normal life, and we are, but we're practicing yoga and we want to become free from entanglement, we're trying to develop a more sattvic existence, a more lightweight existence, less materialistic. This will be helpful for us spiritually. And so Krishna is giving us this advice on how to avoid this kind of downward spiral. Okay. So if the mind is controlled, if we're able to control the mind, then we are able to control the senses, and then we can be very successful in practicing yoga. It's sort of a chicken or the egg problem, because without if we have sattvic practices, if we have a sattvic diet and we have a sattvic lifestyle, it's easier to keep the mind in a sattvic state, in a clean state. If we are physically clean, if we bathe regularly, and if we do some austerity, even small austerity, even doing yoga asanas and pranayam, this is also a type of austerity. It's sort of, okay, I have a time. I'm going to make my sacred time. I'm going to make my sacred space. This is my time. I'm going to do yoga practice. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do some kirtan. I'm going to connect with the divine. And this is what I'm doing. This will help us. It makes it easier for us to not be disturbed by the incessant flow of desires. The problem is, another problem is that when we try to indulge desires, what I always tell my son, if you can't be satisfied with a little bit, you won't be satisfied with a lot. You need to be self-satisfied. You need to practice self-satisfaction. Marketing in Western societies is all about trying to awaken your desires for things that you don't already have. Or, hey, you've got the iPhone 5, you've got to have the iPhone 6 because it's better. It's more and it's better. And no joke, that's what marketing is all about. It's all about convincing you of the need for things that you need to go spend money for, whether you need them or not. And when we try to satisfy our desires through material possessions, it's never really satisfactory. It sort of gives us some temporary relief, and then it just causes something else to flare up. So I'm going to stop there. Anybody have any other questions before we close? So I hope that was all good. Yes, so someone also mentioned that the links, only the first recording link is there in the Gita course. That's because I haven't put the other ones in there. There was a problem that we had accessing it, and I believe I just got that resolved this morning. So, great. So, thank you for coming, and I hope you get inspiration and that Paramatma within the heart will also help guide you. And in your own studies, I do encourage you to read these on your own time and meditate on them and let them sit and kind of soak into your heart. So thank you and namaste.